The series isn't about moving faster, improving yourself, or getting unstuck. It's about knowing what you're actually standing on, because every step you take depends on that first. Most people don't decide what they're standing on. They discover it when the ground begins to give way. Let me tell you about Mark. Mark was 42 years old. He lived in the same town he grew up in, not because he'd planned to stay, but because staying was easier than leaving. Every morning, he parked in the same spot, walked the same path to the building, and nodded at the same people he had nodded at for years. He was dependable. That was how people described him. When extra hours were needed, Mark stayed. When problems came up, Mark handled them. When something needed to be absorbed quietly so that things didn't get messy, Mark absorbed it. He told himself this was maturity. At home, he did the same thing. He kept the peace. He avoided the conversations that might fracture the routine. He smoothed over what felt wrong because disruption seemed worse than discomfort. None of this felt dishonest. It felt responsible. Then, one Thursday afternoon, his supervisor closed the door and said, "This isn't personal." The company was restructuring. The position was being eliminated. Mark nodded. He even said, "I understand." That night, he sat in his car in the driveway with the engine off and his hands still on the steering wheel. He didn't go inside. He realized something that frightened him. He had no idea who he was if he wasn't needed. He had no ground beneath him that didn't depend on being useful, agreeable, or strong. Nothing collapsed, but everything felt suddenly unsteady. Mark is the story we're afraid of. We're afraid of being unnecessary. We're afraid of the moment the email comes, or the spouse leaves, or the phone stops ringing. But there's another kind of sand that is even harder to spot. Mark found his ground was unstable because he fell. But what about the people who don't fall? What about the people who climb? There is a kind of sand that feels exactly like rock until you stop moving. Let's talk about Claire. If Mark was defined by dependability, Claire was defined by competence. Claire didn't have a crisis. In fact, she was having the best year of her life. She was a fixer. In her family, she was the one who mediated the conflicts. At work, she was the one who salvaged the difficult accounts. In her friend group, she was the one with the answers. She wasn't just useful, she was impressive. But Claire had a secret. She was living in what I call the internal courtroom. Every decision she made, every conversation she had, felt like it was being transcribed by a stenographer. If she was 5 minutes late, she had to draft a mental defense. If she was slightly curt with a waiter, she spent the next hour replaying the tape, explaining to an invisible jury why she was actually justified, or why she was tired, or why it really wasn't her fault. She was exhausted, not because she was doing too much physical work, but because she was working a second full-time job as her own defense attorney. She was winning every case. She was innocent every day. But the trial never ended. One night, Claire was driving home after a massive promotion. She had won. She was safe. She was validated. And she had to pull her car over, not because she was happy, but because she couldn't breathe. She realized that if she stopped achieving, even for a week, the verdict might change. Her standing didn't depend on who she was. It depended on her ability to keep winning the argument. Mark's sand was failure. Claire's sand was success. Mark sank because the world took his standing away. Claire sank because she had to hold her standing up all by herself every single hour of every single day. And this brings us to the texture of the problem. Why is this podcast called Where to Stand? Because you cannot stand if the ground beneath you isn't steady. The Bible has a specific name for the feeling Mark and Claire are experiencing. It calls it the miry clay or the pit. We usually think of a pit as a place we fall into by accident, but a miry pit, like quicksand, has a specific property. It reacts to effort. When you're on solid ground and you push down, you go up. That's physics. That's walking. But when you're in a miry pit, when you push down, the ground moves away. The harder you struggle, the deeper you sink. Think about Claire. When she felt insecure, what did she do? She worked harder. She explained more. She optimized her life. She tried to fix her instability by adding more weight to the structure. But you cannot stabilize a house by adding more furniture to the second floor. This is why self-help often feels so exhausting. We are being told to walk, to run, to climb, but we are standing on ground that consumes our energy instead of returning it. We are trying to generate stability from the inside out, and human beings were not designed to be their own ground. This is why so many of us are tired. It is a specific kind of tired. It's not the fatigue of a hard day's work. It's the fatigue of balance. Have you ever watched someone walk on ice? Their muscles are tense. Their eyes are scanning. They're constantly micro-adjusting. They aren't moving forward. They're just trying not to fall. That is how we are living. We are spending 90% of our energy just trying to stay upright, managing our reputations, curating our identities, defending our innocence in that internal courtroom. We assume the problem is that we aren't walking fast enough, but the problem is the floor. I want to leave you with a question today, and I don't want you to answer it quickly. I want you to imagine an audit, not a financial one, a structural one. Imagine that tomorrow, the thing you rely on most is removed. For Mark, it was his job. For Claire, it was her competence. Maybe for you, it's your role as a parent, or your intellect, or your reputation as a good person. If that was taken away, would you still be you? Or would you vanish? Would you have any place left to stand? If the answer scares you, don't run from it. That fear is the most honest thing you've felt in a long time. It is a sound of sand shifting. We cannot learn where to walk until we admit that right now we are sinking. But here's the problem. For many of us, stopping doesn't feel safe enough to try. Next time, we're going to talk about why stopping feels like dying, why stillness feels dangerous, and why the very thing we think will destroy us is the thing we're most afraid to test. I'm James Burke. This is Where to Stand.